Hello and welcome to our first ever flash briefing. These are going to be short, punchy updates when something of note is released by the RAIB or after a significant incident takes place. In keeping with that, I've absolutely embraced the cliche of some very newsy music, and I'm aware it's as cheesy as 3-week-old Stilton, but you know what, I am planning on leaning into it. I was planning on telling you all about these new short episodes when I release the Rail Safety Review episode next Monday, but it seems that timing not quite on my side, as yesterday the RAIB released a safety digest, and I figured I might as well take the opportunity to tell you all about what was in it in this new format. With that in mind, let's get straight into it. The digest released yesterday on the 10th of June 2025 relates to overspeeding incidents which took place in blanket speed restrictions in South Wales on the 27th of January this year. Let's take a gander at what the digest tells us. A whistle-stop tour, if you will. On the 26th of January this year, Network Rail's Wales and Borders route, and I'm pretty sure I said Network Wales there, but Network Rail's Wales and Border route control identified a requirement for blanket speed restrictions, which we're going to call BSRs for the rest of this episode, of 50 miles an hour to be imposed the following day due to forecasted high winds. First of these was between Swansea and Neath between 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening, and the second between Newport and Bishton between 12 lunchtime and 1500 hours. Blanket speed restrictions, they're used to apply speed restrictions to wider areas of the railway than a typical temporary or emergency speed restriction, and they are predominantly put in place as a result of adverse weather, because that tends to be what affects wider areas than, say, problematic earthworks or a broken rail. In this case, it was wind speed that was the factor of concern, and of course, high winds can certainly pose risks to the operation of trains, so it could be trains overturning and trees falling onto the line. You bring the speed of trains down, and both of those factors become less of a problem. So with these two BSRs in place, you would imagine that all was well, but however, this wasn't the case. On the 27th, a controller in the route control centre was trialling a new system that monitors trains, and when they were doing it, they stumbled upon 8 trains, which had actually exceeded the 50 mile an hour speed restrictions across those two areas. The overspeeds, well, they varied in their severity, but the lowest instance of speeding was 61 miles an hour in that 50. One of them was 88, and 3 of them were in excess of 90 miles an hour, which was kind of approaching the twice the imposed limit. The digest also covers off the reasons the speeding took place, and thankfully it's not in any case an act of violation from the drivers involved. It wasn't intentional, and none of the speeds were in excess of the general posted line speed, just the speed restriction. The overspeeds occurred because signals for the relevant sections of track and the drivers involved were either not aware of or had forgotten about the imposed BSRs, and actually in the case of one of the drivers, they were incorrectly advised by a signaller that the BSR wasn't in place. Yep, that's right, like I said, one of the drivers involved actually contacted the controlling signaller, and when they queried if the BSR was in force, were told no, and therefore drove at line speed. Clearly, things have gone wrong, and the digest shed some light on this as well. Where necessary, Network Rail's control room staff generally issues notices detailing BSRs going into the relevant railway companies, including the train operating companies or TOCs, running trains through the areas. These notices detail the specific speed restrictions, along with the geographical limits and the time for which they are to be applied. Each TOC then uses its own internal processes to pass this information on to its drivers. Processes do vary between companies, so some TOCs will post copies of Network Rail's notices at the signing on points in the late notice case, and others will issue personal copies of the notices to each driver, either electronically or using good old-fashioned paper. And this accounts for how the operators and in turn the drivers are supposed to be aware of these incidents, these blanket speed restrictions. So, on the day, Network Rail's Wales and Borders route control produced 2 notices, each of them detailing the proposed BSRs, and shortly after midday they were sent by email to a distribution list that included the defined contacts, so the set email addresses for each of the TOCs involved, it's 3 of them, and also a shared email inbox for the shift signalling managers, or SSMs. The SSMs have the responsibility of supervising a group of signallers, including in this case, all the signallers who are actually relevant to this incident. The process for issuing the notices required that TOCs and other external contacts acknowledge they've received the notice by replying to the email. However, crucially, there isn't actually, in the process, any requirement for SSMs or signallers to acknowledge themselves. When emails of this nature had been seen by the SSM on duty at the time, the local process was for them to print out the copies and leave them on the relevant workstations for each of the signallers so they were aware. However, in this case, this hadn't taken place, because in the early afternoon a manager visited the SSM and asked them why the restrictions weren't being obeyed. The response, it transpired, what restrictions? The SSM had no knowledge of the BSRs, and if anyone was going to have knowledge of the BSRs, this is the individual at Network Rail you'd probably expect to and want to have it. So, those emails were sent the day before, but they were delivered to an SSM shared inbox, a nice email inbox that all of the SSMs had access to. However, they weren't seen by the SSM who was on duty at the time, who was apparently undertaking some other duties, and then the other SSMs between then and the following day. They didn't see them either. Part of the issue here is probably that the BSR notices were apparently delivered to the general inbox, where all the other non-critical emails went, and not to the more specific inboxes that maybe the serious stuff gets directed to. And the dominoes, of course, start to fall at this point with the SSM unaware, the signallers are therefore not informed, and they're not going to do another really helpful task, which helps drivers adhere to these restrictions. If they'd had knowledge that the BSRs were in place, they would be able to have set up reminder announcements to be automatically sent to trains using the GSMR radio system as they approach the site of speed restrictions, which is a really handy feature of GSMR. And in fact, it's so handy that it's an activity that's mandated by Network Rail's National Operating Procedure for speed restrictions. So clearly, by this point, we're all a little set up to fail. TOCs had put the notices up in the relevant cases at depots, but drivers provided a variety of answers. Some of them saying they'd not understood the document's significance, or they'd been focused on route learning and forgotten about the BSR. One of the problems with BSRs compared to some other speed restrictions, so temporary speed restrictions and emergency speed restrictions, is that BSRs themselves do lack any associated line-side signage or the temporary AWS magnets that you get at these other sites. And if you don't have the GSMR alert set up, there's kind of no indicator to say you're entering into a BSR. It's visually exactly the same as the meter or tour track in advance of it. You don't know. There isn't a warning board. There isn't a horn that sounds when you head over a magnet. You're not in the BSR, and then you are in the BSR. And that is a bit of a problem, because the branch identified, and I thoroughly agree with this, that has reduced it. This situation as we are now has reduced it to one single point of failure for the compliance with this restriction: the driver's memory. And they are very good. They've got incredible memory. Route learning is phenomenal, and having seen people I work with route learn, I'm occasionally baffled at the retention that they have. But the BSRs aren't there every day. It's not part of the day-to-day route. And yeah, all you're relying on at that point is the driver's memory, which I'm sure you can imagine can be problematic as a concept. Not a great place to be if we think about the Swiss cheese model of health and safety. Take out all the slices but one. So, as part of the digest, the RAIB have also identified a number of previous occurrences that were similar to this one, and there are some similarities and issues that run across. In 2021, there were 6 overspeeding incidents in blanket speed restrictions in Aberdeenshire, and in that incident, which actually made it into being a full report, the conclusion included a recommendation, and this was it was intended to trigger a review of the methods used to implement blanket speed restrictions, and off the back of this, the ORR, the Office of Rail and Road, reported to the RAIB in 2022 that this recommendation was being implemented. Yeah, Potentially, let's see. The report also included learning points concerning the importance of drivers being aware of information contained in late notice cases and the need for safety critical communications. There's more of a mouthful than I thought it would be. Safety critical communications to provide clear and unambiguous information. So if you can connect that event to this one, maybe some of the issues weren't quite ironed out. Especially when you consider that in Wales again in 2022, it was found that there were a number of overspeeds again, and this was a result of drivers not having a clear understanding of where and when those BSRs applied. And it would feel mean to leave out 2023, because at that point trains were found overspeeding through a BSR in Scotland, when the drivers were found not to have been informed of the restriction, and that helpful GSMR alert wasn't possible because of the type of signalling in the area. So it's a bit of a reoccurring issue, yeah? We can but hope that the digest produced on this occasion feeds into a process which I'm sure is underway and helps to improve the system going forwards. Last point on this one from me then. The RAIB has added a section at the top of this digest which shares an important safety message from the incident. And this was that the incident demonstrated the importance of having robust and effective processes for delivering safety critical messages to drivers about restrictions. Also, the importance of using available technology to deploy those messages, and probably the key one for me, and I'm sure you'll agree, given what we've just talked about, having operational procedures in place which ensure that those safety critical messages actually reach the staff who are needed to act upon it. Right, done. Time to breathe now. That's what a flash briefing looks like. Nice, quick, punchy. They might be a little bit longer if there's a full report that comes out or that there's a bit more to talk about in the safety digests, but it's just, this is news. You guys clearly have an interest in railway safety. I thought it might be worth sharing things with you as they happen. So I hope you found the value in it. I couldn't tell you when the next one of these is going to be, because I don't know what's going to come out when. But in the meantime, I will leave you all to go back about your days, and I will see you on Monday the 16th for our next episode, which will be a rail safety review, and we'll be back on the 23rd with another full episode. For those of you who like a spoiler, on that one we'll be heading back to 1989 and to the London suburbs to visit Purley. Until that point, travel safe.